Thanks, Sue. So hi, everyone. Welcome to the second part of our webinar series. As promised, both Brian Smith from Boston College and John-Paul Foxe from Concordia University are back with us today to carry us deeper into the conversation we started last time. Brian and John-Paul are joined today by Joel Trudeau and Robert Stephens from Dawson College. Joel and Robert, as co-leaders of the Dawson AI Artificial Intelligence Initiative, will provide us with a model for how a community of learning can approach the current AI disruption at a variety of levels. Importantly, Joel and Robert are going to share specific examples of how AI has been successfully used in post-secondary courses, which is going to lead us into a discussion of how we can use it in our own courses while maintaining academic integrity. I'm going to begin with a brief introduction of each of our speakers, but I want to point out that my introduction is just the tip of the iceberg, as all four have been prolific in their educational work. Brian Smith. Brian, are you able to give a wave? Put you on the spot, thank you. Brian is the Honorable David S. Nelson Professor and Associate Dean for Research in the Lynch School of Education and Human Development at Boston College. He has degrees in computer science, engineering, and the learning sciences, and brings his significant experience in computer-based learning environments and human-computer interactions to the questions we'll be considering today. John-Paul Foxe is Senior Director for the Center of Teaching and Learning at Concordia University. He is an expert in supporting academic integrity in higher education, with 7 years experience as the Director of Academic Integrity at Toronto Metropolitan University. And along with being the project co-lead of the Dawson AI initiative, Joel Trudeau is a physics teacher and founder of SPACE, an interdisciplinary student enrichment project. Joel's work in education lies in the intersection of science, arts, and technology, and fosters an integrative approach to teaching and learning. His colleague, Robert Stephens, teaches philosophy and humanities at Dawson College and is the current coordinator of the ALC Arts and Culture Profile. Robert's PhD dissertation explored how challenges in the development of AI can illumine how the human mind is organized, and conversely, how human cognitive limits can help us inspire new designs for AI. So with all of that said, you can see you're in capable hands today. A bit of admin after the webinar, which is going to end at 4 p.m. We ask that you complete just a 2-minute survey so we can continue to offer you the programming that suits your needs. Sue will post the link in the chat periodically in case you have to leave early. And if you can't find it, just ask in the chat and she'll get it right to you. Also, if you have questions during the presentation, we prefer that you type them into the chat rather than raising your hand. We'll try to address some as the presentation goes along, and we're going to have at least half the time for the panelists to have open discussion and addressing your questions. So we will get to them. So with that, I'm going to pass you on to our panelists, I believe starting with John-Paul. Thank you and enjoy.
Thanks very much, Phoebe, for that gracious introduction. I'm very, very happy to be back here today, and then, of course, to be joined by my co-panelists. Before I go any further, though, I'd like to take just a moment to give a territorial acknowledgement. So I'm coming to you from Concordia University, and I acknowledge that Concordia University is located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Ganagahage Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today. Montreal, or Tiohtià:ke, is historically known as the gathering place for many First Nations. Today, it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections from the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. Excuse me. Okay, so we're going to jump right in today. What I will do is I'll give just a really, really brief summary of some of my main points from the last time. I want to talk a little bit about integrated course design, and then I'm going to pass it over to my colleagues. So Phoebe, next slide, if you wouldn't mind, please. Oh, here we are. Here's our overview. So like I said, I'm going to take the first 2 points, then I'll pass on to my colleagues from Dawson, who'll talk about from pilots to implementation. offloading and overloading, teaching to the text generation, and then we will move to our panel discussion. And as I said, and as Phoebe said, excuse me, we want to, as much as we can, give time for conversation and discussion today. So we'll move right along. When we spoke, excuse me, last time about academic integrity and generative artificial intelligence, I framed academic integrity as a values-based construct. And of course, this is not something I've come up with myself. This is quite common across the literature. The values that I spoke of come from the fundamental values of academic integrity, which is a project out of the International Center for Academic Integrity. And the values associated, those fundamental values, excuse me, are honesty, trust, fairness, respect, responsibility, and courage. Recognizing that each of our institutions will have different policies that will talk about academic integrity as well as academic misconduct. They will have guidelines and whatnot. But if we think about integrity in terms of these values and the way in which we can apply these values to our work, and of course, I'm speaking about all of us, not just our students, then those definitions become a little less important. Next slide, please, Phoebe. Now, I just said maybe definitions aren't as important as we might think, and now I'm going to say the complete opposite, right? It is important, of course, for us and for our students to know what we're talking about when we say academic misconduct. Any one of us, if we were asked to define misconduct, we would define it in different ways. So we need to have the same working definition. Here's one. Again, our own policies at our own institutions will have many. One is any action or attempted action that undermines academic integrity and may result in an unfair advantage or disadvantage for any member of the academic community or wider society. And this comes from the European Network of Academic Integrity. In terms of Gen AI or artificial intelligence, they have categorized or called or defined unauthorized content generation as the production of academic work in whole or in part for academic credit, progression, or award, whether or not payment or favor is involved using unapproved or declared human or technological assistance. My God, that's a mouthful. Many of us are wondering, what do we call it? Is it if a student uses ChatGPT, for example, when they're not supposed to? Is that plagiarism? Is it cheating? This particular group of folks have come up with this definition: unauthorized content generation. Next slide, please, Phoebe. Okay, so when we were planning for this webinar today, we had a lot of conversations, us panelists and Phoebe and others and Liz and whatnot. And we thought, well, how are we going to frame this discussion today? And we thought, well, one of the ways in which we can do it is if we're thinking about Gen AI and the effect Gen AI has on artificial intelligence, let's think about it in terms of a bigger picture and how we go about designing our courses. So I'm really, really quickly going to review something called integrated course design. This may be something that's really familiar to many of you. Some of you may not know a whole lot about it, but we'll run through it. So if you were to design or to teach a course, what is the first thing you need to know? Or what are some of the first things you need to know? Well, you need to know what are called the situational factors, or what I'm referring to as the situational factors. Situational factors are things like, how many students are you going to have? What year are your students? What level of knowledge are they coming with? Are there prerequisites? Are there co-requisites? Is this an in-person class? Is this an online class? Is it a hybrid class? Or a, what's the word? High flex class? What is it? And before you can go about designing your course or thinking about how you're going to teach this course, you need the answer to all of those questions. Then, and only then, according to this model, are you going to address your learning outcomes. So one way to think about your learning outcomes is to pose the following question: with what skills, knowledge, or attitudes will students leave this course? So again, what knowledge, skills, or attitudes will the successful student leave this course with? Okay, that's one way of thinking about that. All right, so our skills, knowledge, and attitudes. When we're writing our learning outcomes, we try and make them begin with a verb. We want them to be specific. We want them to be measurable. So speaking of measurable, if you ask somebody what is the point of assessment, well, you'll get a variety of different answers. But what I'm going to say is that the point of assessment is to give us, and when I say us, I mean both us as educators as well as the students, some information as to how well the students are achieving the learning outcomes for the course, right? If we think of it in those terms. So the assessments and the learning outcomes are very, very closely tied together. Finally, then, we ask what teaching and learning activities are necessary to equip the students to achieve those learning outcomes. Now, I know I'm going through this really quickly, but I hope all of that makes sense. So next slide, Phoebe. If we think about it then, because this is an integrated model, all of these elements have to support one another. I'll give you a really simple example. Imagine you're teaching a course on writing, and then you want to have a writing assessment. Shockingly, seems to make sense, right? But you have 400 students and you have no TAs. Are you going to be able to ask, or are you going to be able to grade 400 essay style papers? Probably not. So you need to rethink that, okay? So again, you start with your situational factors, you then move to your learning outcomes, then your assessments, then your teaching and learning activities. Now, I know many of you are wondering, how is this relevant? Why are we talking about this today? Well, what we are talking about today is Gen AI and academic integrity. So where do you think in this conversation should we start? Should we focus? And the answer, next slide, Phoebe, is on our assessments, right? In terms of promoting academic integrity. So what we want to do today through this conversation is look at the various aspects of this model, of this course design, and ask ourselves, what role does Gen AI have? What role do we have in terms of looking at our course design and promoting academic integrity in light of Gen AI? Okay, and then I'm going to stop right there and I'm going to pass it over to my colleagues from Dawson.
Thank you very much, John Paul. Thank you, Phoebe, for the introduction. And thank you, SALTISE, for having us and involving us with this very important series on the impacts of AI on education and academic integrity. Robert and I are very pleased to be here. We're just going to kind of give a brief overview to situate Dawson in the AI landscape here in Montreal and in the education network more broadly. Talk a little bit about some of the things we've been doing generally, and then focus in on the topics that we'll continue discussing in the panel. So I'll give a brief overview and just also acknowledge SALTISE again for hosting us in 2019 when we formally launched the AI initiative at Dawson. We've been thinking about the impacts of AI on education for a while, and we're hoping we can share some of that learning. But from the outset, the goal from Dawson's point of view was a comprehensive approach to AI and its impacts on education, and to broadly expose as many students as possible to AI topics and themes across all programs. And so some of those themes in our launch are listed there, but I'd just like to highlight some things that will be relevant for today, and in particular, the importance of developing a community of practice within your institution so that faculty, staff, and those in management can participate in the conversation, as well as have professional development opportunities. And one of our main focuses has been in curriculum development. So I'd just like to focus on that, the idea of capacity building with your institution as a linchpin for success if you're going to tackle the impacts of AI on education at the college level or any level. And so with a teacher-centered focus and professional development, we've had 2 AI-themed communities of practice running over a number of years that are being amalgamated into a single community of practice now. But we had a research and a teaching community of practice where teacher fellows either explored topics within their discipline or in an applied research context. And so with that focus, we have developed community of practice across all sectors of the college, and have upwards of 50 plus faculty members who have been involved at some point. So Robert and I are here today representing the Dawson AI initiative, but it's really the work of a huge number of people across programs and from diverse backgrounds. And then our other focus has been on student-centered activities. And so in our pilots, we have tried as much as possible to involve students both on the research side and on the education side. And we've run a number of activities, learning activities inside and outside the classroom over a number of years. And so this is just to highlight also the importance of implicating students in the process. And so what we're doing is we're moving from many pilots that we've run with grant support and with our institution support to an implementation phase. And so just to give some statistics here, a number of students within the community have been reached over since 2019. We've had multiple courses impacted, multiple talks, and multiple grants awarded. Just like to focus on where we are now. And so where we're moving is from pilots to implementation. And we'd like to acknowledge Nova Science for a major grant that we have currently. And the idea is that we are developing an implementation toolkit for CEGEPs. And so our theme here is that we'd like to share our learnings with the broader community and focus on the importance of having partnerships across institutions and within the AI ecosystem. And so we feel like we've made some progress in that regard, and we'd really like to share that with everyone. With respect to the themes that we're covering in this webinar, we've had many interesting discussions in the lead up, and one of the themes that came out of our discussions was this notion of offloading cognition and overloading with information, and how AI technologies are driving these factors. And in particular, for generative AI, there are many challenges and opportunities for teaching and learning. I should have said bing. Sorry, Robert. So Robert's running the slides now. Our community of practice representing a diversity of backgrounds and disciplines. You can see in this image, bing. Thanks, Robert. And here's some images of our students participating in the multiple activities that we've been involved with. In the middle there, you see a banner for one of the projects that we have currently with an external partner, the AI Launch Lab. And the idea here is to offer workshops and training for college students from any college. And we've been running several cohorts of this, and hundreds of students have been implicated in that. Bing. You'll have to pardon me for not following the slide progression here. And so again, we've had a number of impacts both locally and beyond based on the pilots that we've been running. And so now I'd like to go to the offloading and overloading theme here. And so with respect to challenges and opportunities, we might say that on the opportunity side, digital learning tools they're coming of age, and the usage of these tools for teaching and learning is only going to grow. And to have some awareness of the possible tools that are out there and the affordances that they'll provide for teaching and learning is going to be important. And there's multiple opportunities for that will lead into things like personalized learning and increase accessibility for those in in all communities, including remote communities. And so as students offload more and more of their cognition onto technology, we might ask what skills, knowledge, and attitudes to bring back what John Paul has been saying, should we not compromise on? Next slide, please. Bing. And so, the flip side of the coin of accessibility is that, there still will remain a digital divide and inequality in access to these technologies. But with respect to challenges and opportunities we face as educators, evaluation and assessment is going to be a big one, and that we all have to reflect on. And in particular, we'll have to consider our roles as educators and the importance of professional development and keeping pace with these rapid changes. And is that now a new role, a new set of tasks that we have to take on in education? That's a daunting challenge as well. And so, with the information overload and need for continuous adaptation, how might we best use AI-driven technologies to navigate these changes that are afoot? And in particular, can we improve learning outcomes, or can we effectively achieve the learning outcomes and standards that we before? What we'd like to do now is to kind of focus on some specific examples that with respect to generative AI and some of the work that Robert and colleagues have been doing, and talk about set the stage for a panel discussion and get your points of view as well. So I'll pass it to you now, Robert.
Great, thanks. Happy to be here to talk about these things. So I just want to say, first of all, that everything I'm going to talk about here is the fruit of working with a lot of teachers from across all disciplines in the college. It's been really a pleasure to work in an interdisciplinary way with teachers talking about AI. I've learned a gigantic amount and been inspired to, play with it, positively, but also worry about the implications for student learning. And it's funny, obviously, it's sort of on everybody's radar, ChatGPT, since about a year ago. It's sort of a nuclear bomb that went off in academia. And that's why I've given various versions of a talk like this, Joel and I have together, about teaching to the text generation, because it does sort of feel like there's, obviously in education, things change all the time, but this one's a pretty big change. And it's a challenge and an opportunity, but we need to evolve and we need to move quickly to kind of stay one step ahead of it. And it's interesting because when I first started with the Dawson AI group 4 years ago, I joined up not as a co-lead originally, but just as one of the fellows in the first cohort of fellows. And one of the workshops we did, the fellows in that cohort, was we were playing around with the old GPT-2 version, the Talk to Transformer version from sort of late 2019. If anybody remembers playing with that, which was not nearly as powerful as what we have today. And already we all sort of freaked out. We put on a workshop for teachers and they got pretty freaked out because we were giving them samples of generated work and comparing it to actual student work and seeing if they could guess, and nobody was better than chance at guessing which was which. And that was 2019. So the beauty of this initiative and having a community of practice like this is we've had some time to think about it and sort of plan ahead, although I don't think anybody expected things to move as quickly as they have, maybe, but yeah. So like I said, we've been giving a version of this talk, teaching to the text generation. Sometimes I joke that it's rage against the machine learning, because for a lot of teachers, it just seems like, who asked for this? I don't need this. On a whole other level, I've had a lot of conversations with art teachers too, who are, sort of, the technologies are amazing, but really for art education, it's what exactly are they going to do with it? How are they going to move forward and so on? It's, who asked for this kind of a question, but it doesn't really matter. We are here. So, the challenge and the opportunity are there. So what can educators do? Here are 4 themes that in general, Joel and I and many of the fellows that we've worked with kind of revolve our thoughts around. So number 1 is students do need to know what Gen AI is and how it works and what the issues are. So, and I think that's across the curriculum, right? As we'll see, it's going to impact every discipline. It already is impacting them. So it's worthwhile making sure students do understand the tool, how it works, at least at some basic level, what are legitimate uses and illegitimate in an academic setting. And that can change very much so from discipline to discipline, what faculty may or may not want students doing with the technology. So these are conversations that need to be had, and students need to be able to understand, moving from discipline to discipline, what is and isn't. A discipline that where the competencies for the course involve specifically writing and composing are going to be different than a course where they aren't part of the core competencies of the course, but they're the vehicle via which other competencies are expressed. And so the use of Gen AI may differ from discipline to discipline, and students need to understand what the expectations are and where the line of academic integrity is. The second point is really just a standard pedagogical point. I'm encouraged sometimes. I think that the answer to all our questions about how to deal with Gen AI are already there in sort of good pedagogy. Gen AI is giving us a chance to rethink our course design and rethink our assessments, which is probably a good thing. Figuring out what we want our students to achieve and how best to get them there, and think about the ways we're assessing and whether or not we're actually assessing what we want to be assessing, and so on. Helping students become more invested in their own learning is a big part of that, because that's going to be the difference between students who use Gen AI as a sort of a crutch or a time saver or a way to get out of doing something, versus the ones that use it as a way to improve and expand on what they're doing and deepen the work that they're doing. Those are very different things. And so making sure that students are using it to deepen their learning and become more invested in what they're producing. So they're not just using it to produce something for them, but they're using it to help them produce something. And then the third and fourth point on this list are the things we'll mostly talk about today, which is, are there ways to design assignments and assessments that are less susceptible to what we're going to call illegitimate uses of AI? And by illegitimate, I don't think there's one set answer to what that means. It's basically, you as the teacher, what you would find as not what you wanted your students to do, or less than what you were expecting from them in some way. So couldn't you design your assignments just so that they're less susceptible for a student who's under a lot of pressure, who may have left something to the last minute, who might turn to it to make things easier in a way that you don't want them to do? Can you design the assessments to make that at least less likely? And then finally, what are the ways that we can leverage the benefits of generative AI in teaching? And there are many, I think. And the more I talk with teachers who are using it actively in the class, there are a lot of great ideas out there for how to bring it into the classroom, especially ChatGPT, in ways that do a number of things at once. On the one hand, teaching them how it works and how it could be used profitably. At the same time, it gives you an opportunity to show what its limits are, show what its limitations are, which is actually really useful because students need to understand that. And on top of all that, it does sort of telegraph something that you, as the instructor, are aware of this thing. Students aren't going to just be using it sort of behind your back, thinking that you're not even aware. Bringing it into the classroom sort of does all these things at once, which is nice. And there are really great assignments and activities that you can make use of it for. So what I thought I'd do is I'm going to share a few examples, and we can hopefully in the panel others have examples too of assignments. And again, these are not all my ideas. These are ideas that have been generated from many workshops that I've done with teachers. These are all things that I have tried and I like them. But so I'm going to separate into a few things. So things that students could do profitably with ChatGPT that you might want to encourage them, again, depending on the discipline and what your expectations are. And then a few specific activities that you could actually do in the classroom. I'm going to give some from the perspective of a philosophy humanities teacher. They are somewhat transferable to other disciplines in some cases. So first of all, ways students could use ChatGPT. So if you are encouraging the use of it, what are the kinds of things that students can do? They may already know some of these things. They may already be doing them, but you can show them how to do it profitably. So using ChatGPT for notes and for studying, super useful. You can get it to clean up a messy set of notes and prepare a more sort of clean and coherent and shorter set of notes to study from. Great at generating study questions. There are other programs that are probably built on the ChatGPT engine that also can generate questions in various disciplines to get students, just to prompt them for their studying. Super useful. Really great for brainstorming, especially an in-class brainstorming session. Sometimes it comes up with really great ideas that the students themselves may or may not have thought of. But it's also a way to multiply yourself, because if I'm in a big group of students and I have a bunch of tables of students that are all brainstorming, and I can go visit one after another and help seed the brainstorming a little, or help maybe finesse it, but I can only be at one table at a time, whereas ChatGPT could be at all the tables at one time and maybe helping me do that job of seeding and finessing brainstorming of ideas. It can be useful for editing and feedback and writing. Obviously, there is where, depending on the discipline, you're going to want to be careful that your students are still understanding the line of using it to help their writing versus doing the writing for them. Clearly, it's going to be super useful, and we're all going to use these technologies to do the writing for us in cases where the writing is honestly just a chore, and that's great. It's good for that. But students will need to be able to understand how to write it in various genres in the first place in order to use it effectively, to use it judiciously, to recognize a good output and know when and where it is appropriate to use it, and also to evaluate the output. But you can encourage the use of it in class with you sometimes, because that way you can have conversations about whether or not it's a sort of appropriate or not use in the context, and whether it's doing the writing for them or whether it's just helping them with their writing. But it is super useful for offering editing advice and for cleaning up texts and whatnot. Many students who don't have English as a first language, for example, can use it to help translate, although ChatGPT often tells you it can't translate into other languages. It clearly can in many cases. And then just as a general information search engine, it's actually, again, useful in the way that Wikipedia is useful. Now, we tell our students, don't cite Wikipedia, don't use Wikipedia as your primary source, but I encourage my students to use Wikipedia as a starting place. If you're doing some research, and get a basic understanding of something you weren't quite clear on, and then follow the threads out from there to various primary sources. In the same way, ChatGPT can be used for that usefully, and because you can steer it a little better as a chatbot, that you can get a more sort of fine-tuned response from it. Again, modeling this in class, showing maybe sometimes activities that show where its limitations are, so students understand the limitations, students understand that it's not always factually correct, that it actually doesn't know anything, that it's just giving a statistically sort of probabilistic answer. And of course, the truth is pretty well represented in its model, so it's often correct, but it's not always correct, and students need to understand. So using it clearly and transparently. Also, if they're going to use it as part of their research, maybe insisting that they make it, cite it, like show their chat logs in some case. And so on. There's many things you can do in terms of making sure the students are using it transparently and thus appropriately. As far as specific examples, so here are some, and I won't spend a lot of time on these. I'll just kind of throw them out there. And when we have the conversation later, if anyone wants to come back to sort of the nuts and bolts of some of these, we can. So I use it a lot in a philosophy or humanities class for these kind of things. So role playing is a really fun one. If it's a person, a character from literature, or a thinker, or a historical person who's well known enough that they would be pretty well represented in the ChatGPT's model, then it will know quite a lot about that person and would be able to role play them, and you can have conversations, which is kind of interesting, right? You can have them role play various philosophers and ask them all sorts of questions, and it becomes kind of a fun activity, but also maybe interesting, and also a way of brainstorming ideas for whatever other projects you might be working on with them. Taking advantage of the hallucinations, or what Meredith Whitaker of the AI Now Institute calls hallucitations, the tendency to run with something and make up quotes and attribute them to people, which it's quite good at. And I find it actually an amazing thing that the quotes are often what I'd say are fake but accurate. ChatGPT will often quote and cite people falsely, make up things completely that don't exist in that form, but sort of makes sense that the person would have said that, or maybe should have said that in some cases. So again, I like using it in class. Sometimes it's kind of fun to get the students on purpose to try and get it to hallucinate some quotations from a philosopher that we're working on, and then get them to kind of analyze those references. First of all, are those actually quotes? We have to maybe go back and mine the text and see if they were real or if they're not real. And then if they're not real, could they have been real? So we really have to sort of think about the way this person thinks, and would they have said this thing that they clearly didn't say. So again, kind of a fun activity, interesting, teaches them about ChatGPT, but also gets them thinking about the philosophy that I'm trying to teach them in the first place. Again, for critical analysis, you can get a ChatGPT to explain an idea. This would work, I think, in most disciplines. Get ChatGPT to explain the thing that we're trying to understand, and then get students to evaluate the explanation. Because in my experience, and probably most of yours, ChatGPT is sort of like a B+ student. Gets basically it's mostly correct. It says things clearly, it's understandable, but a little bit, perhaps superficial, a little bit trite. And then you can have an interesting activity with students where they analyze the output and see, what more could have been said, what is missing from this, what isn't quite right about this, and so on. Which again, dual purpose, teaches them about how ChatGPT works and what its limitations are, while at the same time getting them to really kind of think about the subject matter and probably think about it a little more deeply than they might have if they just wrote their own analysis in the first place. And then finally, a really big one is ethics. Especially in my classes, we talk about ethics a lot. And there's a whole field of AI ethics, which is super interesting, especially the bias that's built into machine learning systems. And ChatGPT, of course, like any machine learning system, exhibits all sorts of bias. My favorite one that I like to do with students is if you ask it to name 10 philosophers, it will dutifully name 10, the sort of the obvious 10 that you might think of off the top of your head. And of course, they're all men. Then you tell it, oh, I notice they're all men, and it will say, sorry. It will say that's an oversight. Of course, there are many women philosophers that have made important contributions, and we'll give you a list of 10 women philosophers. Of course, they'll all be white Western women. And then you note that, and again, it apologizes, and it gives you a list of 10 non-white, non-Western philosophers who are, of course, all men. And then you get it, you note that to ChatGPT, and ChatGPT will again apologize and finally give you a list of non-white, non-Western, non-male philosophers. At which point you say, now name 10 more that you haven't mentioned yet, and you're right back to a list of 10 Western white men, which it's just funny because it clearly learns nothing from the conversation that you had. Which again, it's a great kind of funny, a bit disturbing, but funny and interesting, because you get to have a whole conversation about why it does that, or how machine learning systems work, how the biases, the human biases that are in the data set sort of get reified into the outputs of ChatGPT. It also, again, teaches them about the limitations of using something like ChatGPT. And then we can have all sorts of activities where students try on purpose to generate sort of stereotypical and or biased outputs. And then we try and reverse engineer. Why do we think ChatGPT output that? So those are examples of sort of in-class activities in a sort of humanities-based discipline that you could use. Again, some of them may or may not be transferable to other disciplines, but the ideas behind them might be useful. And then the other thing that I like to do, again, you might just do this for fun, or it might be part of a more formative assessment, or it may be part of a bigger assignment somehow, especially if you're in a discipline in which creative work is part of what you're trying to get them to do. But playing with the creative aspects of ChatGPT and getting it to aid student creativity, and also just sort of have a little bit of fun with it. Again, at the same time, telegraphing how it works and what its limitations are. So Joel and I, we participated in a jailbreaking activity last year, which was really fun, getting students to try and get ChatGPT to go outside of its sort of parameters, get it to do something a bit outrageous. Some of you have probably heard in the news all these various fun things. There was the Dan strategy, the do anything now or something, where you could get ChatGPT to sort of be ridiculous and say all sorts of things it wasn't supposed to say. Prompt engineering in general, just trying to get it, what's the most effective and efficient way to get it to output a very specific thing. So students have to kind of think, reverse engineer. If I want this output, what's the best way to ask it? In what order can I ask the questions, and so on. Creative writing in general, creative writing is, often it's not great, but it can do it. Its poetry is not great, but it can do it. it can, what's a really fun project to do is combine the art generation with the text generation and get students to create like panel comic strips where you get the AI, especially if you have ChatGPT 4.0, or even the students all have a Snapchat AI, which can read images too. So you can generate an image with AI and then get an AI to read the image and get an AI to describe the image, get a ChatGPT to suggest a new prompt for the next image in a panel comic, and sort of ping-ponging back between text and art generation, sort of create a whole comic strip or a storyboard for a scene or something like that. And it's interesting. It can go off the rails and become bizarre, or sometimes it works out really well. And again, interesting opportunity to sort of teach how the technology works, what it could be used for to help with creativity, and also sort of its limitations. And then finally, composition, getting it to compose all sorts of things. We did a songwriting contest last year, which was quite fun. And the winner, it was really good. The winner asked for a song in the style of Elliott Smith about McDonald's. And the song was actually pretty good. And it made sense. It's kind of dark and sad about the shame of going to McDonald's all the time. So again, these are the lighter side of trying to bring it into the classroom in ways that can turn out to be profitable. But again, always with the eye to teaching them about this technology, what it can do, what it can't do, what it's useful for, what it's not so useful for, and so on. So I think I will stop there with specific examples, but we wanted to move it to the panel discussion at this point, and open it up to, most of my examples are more sort of performative assessments rather than, sorry, my dog is barking. But in what ways have all of us reconsidered our assessments, our assessments in light of generative AI? I'll mute now so my dog doesn't bark.
Thanks, Robert. So I'll put my video on for a sec here. So just to be clear, we're asking this of the audience to respond in the chat, and that will start the panel off in their discussion once we get some responses.
And I do agree with Cameron. I just want a second. I think we do need to see that dog, because that dog that's a big dog.
He's I've whooshed him off to another room now, but there was a squirrel outside, so he was going.
Of course.
Do you want me to stop sharing the slides so we can see everybody's face there, or?
Yeah, let's do that. We can type the question in the chat. I'll pop it in. We'll just give everyone a couple minutes to ponder and type.
Phoebe, we're also happy to take any other questions that folks in the audience might have.
Yeah, for sure. If someone wants to ask a question, we'll keep an eye on the chat for that as well. There haven't been any questions yet that appeared while you were talking. Just comments, running commentary.
I just saw Cameron's comment that that his advice is to do everything the active learning folks tell you, and I think that's actually really good advice. And ChatGPT is kind of a, just think of it as a student in your class who's really likes to participate and has a lot to say, and is in every group at once, which is kind of it's a good strategy to organize an active learning or group discussion or group production activity with it.
From that point of view, also we might think of AI as not replacing anything, but as another contributor. So the idea of collaborating with AI, back to this this notion of offloading, and introducing the technology in a gentle way. Get used to playing with it, but also making sure that the students know that you're using it because they're using it. And as we continue to use it more and more, we'll discover more of its uses, as well as its misuses. But one of the challenges we identified is that the goalposts are moving all the time. So all the examples that we're giving are going to be old examples, several months from now, right? And so all the possible examples we could think of right now will proliferate into more and more examples. So I think one of the take-home messages from our point of view is that having this conversation is the takeaway. Continue to follow, continue to inform yourself, because the goalposts are moving.
Liz, I see that, Liz, you posted down that, the Gen AI it seems it's allowing us to reveal weaknesses in our teaching and, in the ways that students understand. And I often think about, like, this past year, just so everyone knows, happy birthday yesterday, ChatGPT. I don't know what you guys bought it, but I didn't buy it. I didn't buy it a present either. But it strikes me that in this year, one of the best things that's happened is not, in my opinion, is not necessarily the technology itself. It's these amazing conversations that we've been having as educators around the thing, right? And certainly it's got some really interesting, as a technology, it's fascinating. I mean, there's no doubt about it. But I've just really been impressed by all of these groups. And Joel, you were talking about it earlier in terms of community of practice. I've seen more universities coming together, people coming together, and K-12 as well, going, on one hand, first kind of a, what do we do, almost like a fear, and then kind of a, like, well, actually, oh, you're doing that and you're doing that. You know what? This isn't so bad. We can actually kind of rethink. So I just think that it's a really positive kind of side effect that sometimes gets lost when we think first, if you think about the technology first. But I think it does, as Liz says, that it's certainly for myself, it's kind of, I went, oh, there's things I could do better. And these, some of my students were cheating before. And so it's even shown me there, like, there were things that I should have been thinking about, again, in terms of the ways that I was designing activities and assessments. And so, it's not, I think it's a great tool for that, as well as some of the wonderful examples that Robert showed us.
That's a great point, Brian. I think it also comes full circle with John Paul's message too. It gives us an opportunity to really reflect on what, the skills, knowledge, and attitudes that we're focusing on delivering as learning outcomes, right, in the activities and assessments that we design. Are there going to be affordances for us to actually evaluate that in a data-driven way that we, haven't seen previously? Definitely, we're going to reflect on that, and we see reflected in the chat here, even from folks, this idea of more in-person, more in-class assessment, more interaction. So the importance of humans in the loop here, as we involve the technology in our teaching and learning experiences, becomes even more important, right? So what shouldn't we compromise on in terms of the skills, knowledge, and attitudes that we want to develop in students? It's a good question for us to reflect on. Bubbling to the surface of that is critical thinking, right? Which has different definitions in different disciplines, and different ways of drawing that out through teaching and learning. But for sure, we can identify some of these skills, knowledge, and attitudes that we shouldn't compromise on, regardless of the discipline we're in.
I just noticed there's so many great comments coming in here about and different examples that people are providing, but there's one in particular that has just caught my eye that I want to highlight for everyone. It's from Salma at Dawson. Oh, and now, of course, it's moved on. Oh, here we are. Many, if not, most of my assessments are done in class. Salma says, that gave me a window into how the students use Gen AI. I've encouraged students to use ChatGPT to help them organize their presentation outlines, but not to have it completely create the entire assignment. I really, really love that approach. And I don't know, Salma, whether you would be comfortable telling us how have students reacted to that approach. I mean, you could type it in the chat, you could unmute yourself as you feel comfortable doing. I really, really like that. Oh, sorry, we can. It looks like you're speaking, someone, but we can't hear you, unfortunately. I think she's saying give her 1 minute.
Yeah, no?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So I started just by being frank with them and letting them know, obviously, I know of ChatGPT. This is not a mystery, and that it can be a useful tool. I even have a little blurb about it in my course outline, saying here are some of the acceptable ways you can use it, and here are some of the ways that not recommended to use. And in class, I just asked them so this was towards the end of the semester, they had to create presentations about cases and highlighting some mental health disorders. So I teach in psychology, obviously, and ChatGPT is so good at analyzing cases. So I tried to tell the students, okay, this is you have this case, you have to address these objectives in your presentation. You can't have GPT do the whole thing, because otherwise what's the point? And I make it into a humanized way, in a sense, by saying, well, if you were to seek mental help for your own benefits or for a friend's benefit, how would you feel if whoever you're interacting with just pulled out something from ChatGPT and spewed it at you? So humanizing it that way, I think, made them think about, oh, maybe I shouldn't find shortcuts with ChatGPT. And then in class, I had them start to work on their presentation. I do a lot of class work, so like heavily immersed in active learning. As they were creating their presentations, I had them. I said you can use ChatGPT to create your outline of a presentation, and many of them had it on Snapchat, something I didn't know before. Did you know this? That you can? Okay, so yeah, it's just me. I didn't know this. Oh, you didn't either. Yeah, so they just pulled out their phones. They put in like some of the basic content from the cases they were given, and it created. And they asked specifically for an outline. And I said, would it be okay to look at like what it generated for you? And they showed it to me, and they were it was a very open discussion. So I think that was the key, is just to be frank with them and say, listen, I know this is something that you use. Let's use it. I don't know how to say it in English, but in French is à bon escient. Let's use it well in the right way. Let's use it together and see how we can make it happen. And it did create some really good outlines, and put like using the objectives in a very good order. The one thing I was I also mentioned in the second comment that I've noticed they don't use it when I ask them to be funny or creative in their assignments. They don't even, doesn't even, I don't know if they're hiding it or it doesn't look like crossed their mind, and they're being asking them to add that creativity level also circumvents the shortcuts or the nefarious ways that ChatGPT or or generative AI can be used. I don't know if that was a long answer. Sorry.
No, that's terrific, Selma. Thank you so much for sharing. And I think it's always better to be upfront and frank with their students, but in particular in the context of conversations around academic integrity, it's so much better for everyone involved to be transparent. So I really appreciate you taking the bull by the horns in this respect and taking that approach. I think that's fantastic. You're to be commended.
Go, Joel, go ahead.
Go ahead. I just wanted to, I responded briefly to Annie Helen's comment about, potential applications in STEM fields. So just we didn't really touch on this, but it's not only text generation, right? There's code generation, there's image generation, there's multimodal systems coming online. And for anybody who's looked at ChatGPT Plus, these are already widely available, right? So kind of on the premium side of things, I've been doing some experiments too with generating multiple choice questions. How good is ChatGPT at generating multiple choice questions in a physics context, right? So here is my database of existing questions. Generate me 5 more with this kind of theme. Of course, you have to control for that, but this is one of the banes of test writing, right? Generating good questions and a lot of different questions. Once those questions get out there in the wild, it's very hard to generate good tests. But in reflecting on our assessments, this could also be an interesting tool. I did want to also draw attention to this idea that there's this ecosystem of plugins that are being created. OpenAI has an API, and people are developing on top of that. And so people, have generated plugins. So, for example, you can have scientific texts, articles, whole textbooks even, and you can upload those and have them review it, have that as the basis for a conversation with ChatGPT. So it's not just on the sort of the generally available platform right now, but we can sort of look ahead at what's coming next, and you can have very, very directed interactions with ChatGPT that will help you think about your learning activities, your assessments, and how to stay ahead of the way your students are using it. But this is again very difficult because where do we find the time as educators to stay current, to stay up to date on possible applications? That was kind of a tangent, Annie Helen, to what you were asking about scientific writing, but the applications for it are potentially incredible.
Just to say something about, since you mentioned the multiple choice, we here at Dawson College, we have a group that runs the, you may have heard of these, the TIMSS Pearls tests. These are the big international assessments, reading, mathematics, that are administered to, I don't know how many 100 countries around the world. And so it's the ones where when people say, what is that? I go, it's when you read in the news something like, Canadian students score number 4 behind the United States behind, right? So these are that big battery of tests. And so just the sheer number, and I think the situational factors that John Paul referred to in the very beginning, right? They just have, when people talk about big data, I go, no, these guys have like big data. It's just an enormous amount of data that they collect. And so they have been, even before ChatGPT, I mean, much as the Dawson team, right? That a lot of this stuff has been, like, we've learned a lot before ChatGPT, and I think that knowledge is going to help us move forward. I think it's also why we've been able to do a lot of things this year that haven't necessarily caught everyone off guard. But they've been experimenting with a lot of different item generation, and then scoring of these tests. And eventually it became very clear to them, because the things are so good now with images, that they can in fact put in things like, we want students to draw, to sketch out something, show us something about area or geometry, right? And these have all been scored by humans in the first place. So they have a really interesting set of data where they kind of know, oh, these are the right answers, these are the wrong answers, right? You feed them into these machine learning systems, right? And now you can start to have machines that can generate the assessments and then actually grade them, right? So it's a really powerful idea, and we're seeing some great successes. And that team will always say, but we would never, ever release those exams without hand checking every single one of them before. And I think that's the other part. It's also a great thing that I've seen in some of the comments here is, despite even the power that it has, right? I mean, one of the things we certainly want students and ourselves to do is to, before you turn in that ChatGPT essay, you might want to look it over. And that's how I think, those are the examples when we see the people, it's kind of, I think you use ChatGPT, and the student says, I don't know, like, what makes you think that? And you go, well, either the hallucination or the line at the bottom that says, OpenAI made this, or something like that. But again, even in that assessment community, I think it's a very large scale, example of how it's sort of changing the ways that we might even think about doing assessment at scale.
I wanted to respond to, so Alex just left a comment, and Elizabeth earlier had left a similar comment about the need to just not do take-home writing in a writing-based discipline, especially, and how else to ensure academic integrity in this age with take-home work. And that is, so I just wanted to address that quickly, because I do think that is a big problem, and it's in a lot of teachers' mind, especially language teachers. It's been hard for me as well as a philosophy teacher, because even though technically teaching writing isn't it's not the job of the philosophy course, but we use writing to do the whole course. We ask them to do readings, and traditionally take home the reading, understand it, write up your summary or your reflection on it or your critique of it or something. And then eventually, some thesis-driven essay where you make an argument or compare, contrast two views and this kind of thing. And it's true, in the age of ChatGPT, I don't send that kind of work home anymore, which has been interesting, because what it means is I do it in class. I actually think it's probably better this way, because now I'm there and I'm helping. So we read difficult texts in philosophy, and I want them to try and struggle through it and try and figure it out and try and break it down. ChatGPT can do all that for them and give them the distilled version of it. I mean, so could looking it up on Wikipedia in the first place in the olden days, right? But they would have still had to write their reflection, but now they don't even have to do that. So, I mean, now they could technically get ChatGPT to explain it to them and then even write up the reflection or the summary or whatever it is. So I'm not going to send that home. I'm going to do it in class. And what it means, though, is I'm going to do fewer of those kind of activities. And maybe that's fine, too. Maybe fewer of them, but directed together in class with me. And maybe doing it sort of semi-publicly, especially if you have an active learning room and people can kind of put up their initial attempts, and we can all sort of live edit them together and see what is the best way to explain this view, what is the clearest sort of explanation and distillation. And again, maybe use ChatGPT as a side-by-side, like let it do it, but then we'll try and do it better, And it's interesting because it does mean I've had to change the amount of content that I cover, which again, at first felt like a bad thing. It felt like, well, this is ridiculous. I'm going to have to chop out. I need 5 days of my class now to do this in-class writing that I would have used to send home. That's 5 days that I can't teach, quote unquote, teach something. But that's just a transition that I need to make in my head. Like, well, I was only filling the time with the content I thought I could fill the time with. If I want to fill the time with this active learning and writing and creating text together, reading and doing a close reading together in the classroom as an activity, that means less content. And that's fine too, So it is, but it is a challenge, I think. And there is a conservative impulse a lot of the time to like, well, oh, I'm going to have to drop something. I'm going to have to stop doing something that I used to do in class in order to make space for this in-class writing that I used to send home. But again, it's an opportunity to rethink the nature of those assessments. I mean, really, honestly, I think now that I look back, I was sending way too many readings home and expecting summaries, and I don't know what the point of it was. Some students were probably getting a lot out of it, and most were just punching the clock and giving me some bare minimum that I wasn't super impressed with anyways. So why not do fewer, but why not do them, facilitate them in the classroom, make it a class activity. I don't have to worry about ChatGPT. Maybe I don't need, 3 take-home essays. Maybe I need 1 scaffolded, structured, written together in class essay. Because really, I don't need 3 essays. That was just the way, that's the way, I was reading an article recently, Selma was probably reading the same one by Faf, about the challenges, and that most of us have these beliefs about how to teach that are just based on the way that we were taught. But most of the people who teach in an academic setting are a very specific type of student who kind of liked to go home and do the reading and write it and took it seriously and didn't take the shortcut of plagiarizing or getting someone to write it for them, and enjoys like quiet, solitary work and listening to an instructor lecture for an hour and a half maybe, and so on. So we're a strange breed, but yet it does color the way we think that we ought to be running the classes. And I think it's been a good opportunity for me, I have to say, to really rethink what I'm doing in class and whether it made a lot of sense to send these writing assignments home. And I'm realizing more and more that maybe it didn't at all, and maybe this is actually better. And I can use their at-home time to do different things instead. I can ask them to watch videos or something, a TED Talk, or get them to just do creative work. Like Selma says, I do think they take pride in a creative project in a way that they don't with a more transactional, explanation-based kind of thing. And that they're not that, there will be some students who, for lack of time or just sheer laziness, will let ChatGPT take over creative work too for them, but I think there'll be far fewer. So send that kind of work home, creative work.
You can port that example to STEM. Like some colleagues over at Dawson use reflective writing, but this is an approach widely used, where you have students do in a flipped classroom approach, right, where you have students do readings and stream of consciousness, sort of write down their misconceptions or things that they understand or don't understand about the reading. And what you often find with these reflective writing assignments is that they'll start to resolve their own questions as they're writing. And the purpose is not to provide an assessment on the writing, but is to get the students to think about the material before they come to class, so that the in-class activities and presentation of materials becomes a much richer experience for them, and more of a consolidation of what they're already thinking. So there's opportunities to to think about these kinds of written assignments in new ways, where it's not so much about a summary of content, but a reflection of the students' thinking and how we can bring that back into the classroom. And I think that's valuable across disciplines.
So Liz has just posed the question, John Paul, how will this be impacting teaching and learning offices? That is an excellent question, Liz. And one of the things that I have found, and I'd be curious to hear from other colleagues, is that our faculty colleagues are looking to us for assistance, saying, help, we don't know what to do with this. Many of our faculty colleagues. But what I have found, and where the best conversations have happened, are in venues like this, where we have been able to bring faculty together to have these conversations, because us at different teaching and learning offices, we don't have all the answers, as all of you will know, but it's how faculty are dealing with and using or not Gen AI that I think where some of the most rewarding conversations have happened. I mean, that all being said, one of the things we've done is we've put out guidelines for how to teach in light of Gen AI. It's a tricky sort of a thing, because we can't, well, at my institution, at Concordia, I think it's inappropriate for us to put out a policy on how to teach with Gen AI or not, because different faculty members have different opinions on Gen AI. Is it allowed? Is it appropriate? You go and you ask any given faculty member at any institution, and they're probably going to have a different answer. So we've given guidelines and best practices rather than policies. Yes, Liz.
Yeah, I'm thinking a little bit differently. I know, like I'm listening to the conversation and hearing more about not the what would I do with AI, Gen AI, but Gen AI is changing how I think about what I do, which is how I teach. So if that is true, then the question I'm asking is to be provocative, no, clearly, but I'm asking people like yourself, but also I see in the crowd there, at least there were some people who are teachers for ed programs, teacher ed programs. And I want to know about those people. What are you teaching the new generation of teachers if we are now entering a phase where Gen AI is allowing us to realize that we may not have been teaching in the best ways? And Robert's point, about how he's reflecting, if new teachers are being taught to use Gen AI, what is that? How is that changing the whole education of educators? And the people like yourself who are doing that re-educating or helping the reshaping when educators start, what I think the ed schools call in-service teachers as opposed to pre-service teachers. And I don't mean teachers, I mean us, not elementary school teachers.
Well, I mean, I really liked, as you have said, some of Robert's comments where he talked about, well, the scenario that we're in right now has caused me to examine my own teaching practices. I really, really liked that. And I think that is the type of advice that I would give to any educator, whether they are a new educator, whether they are a seasoned educator or not, is to examine their practice and look at what they're doing and why they are doing it. So if we go back to some of the earlier comments that I made about an integrated course design approach, I think if we go back and we look, how does that apply to what we're doing, right? So the situational factors may or may not have changed. What are the learning outcomes? Are the learning outcomes still appropriate given our new reality? They may be, they may not be. That's not for me to answer, but that is for each individual faculty member to answer, and it is for our programs to answer. So again, I would encourage that conversation more than I can provide answers. And again, not just with the learning outcomes, but with every aspect of that, right? So the learning outcomes are assessments, and then the teaching and learning activities that we're engaging in so that students can achieve those learning outcomes. Are there any folks here who, like Liz has asked, are teaching future teachers? Yes, Mary-Claude, please go ahead.
Yes, I'm a faculty developer like you, Jean-Paul, and we created a community of practice at Polytechnic this spring because there was that really strong, we felt that anxiety amongst our faculties with AI. So we created that community of practice, and we had a few meetings in spring and during summer. And what we realized is once they discovered what it was, the unknown was scary. That's where the anxiety came from. So we presented what it is, we had discussions, we had tryouts, we put them together, how you're going to use it, etc., etc. And then by the end of all that, we felt the anxiety really come down and people feeling a lot more in control. And the conversation is still ongoing and we haven't got all the answers and it's evolving, but at least people they feel equipped to think about it and try things and reflect, and they feel supported. And for us, that was the big thing. Just breaking that unknown was the first step. But the answers, because they're evolving, it's probably for us and way too early to set them we feel in practices and guidelines. We've got some, but they're very loose for now. And maybe eventually with that community of practice, and over time we'll get to have more defined tools.
Go, Liz.
But I guess, Marie-Claude, is it making you have conversations you never had before? That's what I mean by this, like it feels like it's a disruptor, not because it's disrupting, like what I'm not so concerned. I think what you said is really true, which is most people calm down once they understand. But are you seeing an upswing in conversations with your colleagues that you never had? And is that the big disruption that Gen AI is having? The impact is that, not, it's not going to change necessarily, what we do, but the conversations we have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, on assessment and critical thinking, especially.
Yeah, I totally think that, Liz. And I'll say it with my computer science hat on, right? There are no technical problems. There are only social problems and cultural problems and political problems and economic problems. And it's all the human stuff that matters, right? So it's not actually, to me, not necessarily surprising that we would be at this point in time with natural language generation. I mean, and again, it's an incredible technical feat. I don't want to dismiss it. It's a kind of feat where like whole companies can suddenly fire their CEO and rehire them, and like people pay attention. Right? It's just sort of this weird technical kind of, it's a weird world we're in, but I really do think that it's the big thing is that it's brought together people who may not have, certainly I think for my faculty that I work with at Boston College, we didn't tend to, and it's a school of education, but we didn't really talk to each other about our courses, our curriculum, right? We would build our class and we would kind of, okay, I have my class and you have your class, right? But this is really the first time I've seen us all in the hallways going like, wait, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? And so I really do feel that it sort of catalyzes in a way to really kind of sort of reflect and think about, hey, what are we doing? And so in many cases, what are we doing well? Right. I mean, so it's not that everything is bad or anything like that, but it's really, yeah, that's just my standpoint is that I really just think that, yeah, if there's a disruption, it's that the generative tools have been very good at making their way to the public and showing us, oh, hey, look, this is an opportunity and time for us to really kind of think, if you have these machines that can do this stuff, how do we respond to that? And I think the K-12, the K-12 education, that you also asked about that. I think at least in the US, right, I see some of the faculty that I work with starting to think about that. What does this mean in terms of teacher education? How are we going to prepare that next I love the Robert, the text generation, right? So now we're looking at this group of kids who are in college, and they'll be the text generation teachers. And what does it mean for that preparation? And I guess at this point, I would have to say, at least I don't know. And I'm not sure that my colleagues have figured that out. And then some of it's going to be what kinds of things, how fast can they move? Again, this is the United States, and given our connections to government, that states and local districts and states and things like that don't move nearly as fast. Hopefully they will, because maybe they feel the same threat. But I think a lot of that teacher education is going to take a little bit more time to develop, only because they're at least, again, for the US, there's just all of these sort of political things about certification, and they have to learn these things. And so where do we move around those things to include some additional thinking? But, I'm sure we'll get there, but I think it'll be a little bit slower than what we can do perhaps at the university level.
Sarah's got her hand up.
Hi, everyone. Well, Liz, to answer your first question, I do teach in a teacher education program, and I would like to just share what we have been doing and my observations so far. The interesting thing is when teaching in a normal teacher track program, we have 2 tracks at McGill. There is the OFNI, which is the Office of Indigenous and Inuit Education, and there is the certification, it's just teacher certification for Quebec. So with the second group of people, there was a lot of reluctancy in using AI in the classroom. How is it going to affect our grades? What grade are we going to get? It was all grade based, how AI is disrupting their product-based way of thinking, right? It's not process based, so it's really product oriented. So what are we producing? How is it going to look? What grade am I going to get? But then with my Indigenous students, it was like, whoa, this is amazing, because Indigenous pedagogy is process based. So it did not really disrupt, but it actually augmented the process and increased productivity in a process of teacher training in Indigenous program. And there was no disconnect whatsoever in introducing AI to enhance learning versus in a normal track where everyone is product-based trained and coming from an industrialized background. And I think AI, if I may say so, or at least I'm a bit optimistic, is going to decolonize our educational system in the way it is approaching product-based education and transforming it into process-based education. So that is my optimism. I don't know if that's going to work or not, but at least so far that has been my experience.
That's really interesting, and I love your optimism. I hope you're right. That's fascinating.
I second that. As somebody who works with Indigenous students who are particularly interested in going into STEM futures, I'd love to know more about what you're doing, actually, Sarah. I might reach out to you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that could actually be another conversation that we could have at some point. I know when I've worked with Indigenous educators and they've explained to me that they're not using learning objectives specifically, at least the one person I had in mind, and it kind of blew my head off, because everything I do focuses at that top with the model that John Paul proposed, like always having my objectives in mind rather than focusing on the it's not that we don't focus on the process, but you're right, product versus process. It's a whole different way of thinking. And so far in this session, we've been looking at a product based approach and looking at, what skills can we offload and what skills do we need to keep? Maybe there's something else there that we haven't even considered. Just keeping in mind, we have 4 minutes until the end of the session, which leaves us time for more conversations, but not a lot of time.
I'd like to reintroduce as maybe a student perspective again. I think a lot of what we're talking about needs to have student voices, and we haven't really touched on this a lot, but I think there's going to be a real focus on project-based learning, experiential learning, and kind of moving away from traditional individual assessments and a lot of collaborative work and group work, and that's already difficult by itself, even before AI has hit the scene. But I think a student perspective here would be important for us to keep in mind. We already are in competition for their attention and their reduced attention spans, and their uses of technology are different than ours as educators, and maybe there's a generational divide there too. So I think that's going to be an important part of our learning on how to use these technologies. But how are students using them? What are their attitudes towards using them? and how can we best use them so that our learning outcomes in terms of skills and knowledge are most beneficial for them. They're the ones really who are going to lead in this age of AI. So
Thanks, Joel. I think you just wrapped us up in a lovely bow. Thank you. That's perfect. What an interesting conversation. Thank you so much to all 4 of our panelists and all of you for participating, typing in the chat, expressing your ideas out loud. It's been proposed that we have a 3rd webinar now, so, we'll see. There's certainly more to discuss. Sue has posted the link to the survey. Sue, do you want to just post
Yeah,
it one
I'll do it
final
again.
time?
Thank you.
I said it will take 2 minutes. She says it will only take 1 minute. We appreciate it very much. And thank you one more time to our panelists. It's been great.
There you go.